Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, Lisa Schlossberg, your host, and we are back for another iteration of my stream of consciousness. And I so appreciate you being here. This has been quite a journey for me showing up to this commitment of recording these episodes. And now that I'm recording them and they are also being produced and published, it's so great to be in touch with you guys that are listening to this. So I just wanted to start with thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for your feedback and your questions and all this stuff. It's been so wonderful to feel a sense of community around this. So anyway, we are back, and kind of as I've done in the last few episodes, I want to start with some follow-up thoughts because I listened again and I had a few things drop in over the last few days that feel more related to kind of this idea of living a spiritual life and being a spiritual being. And even though I really want to talk more about fierce self-compassion and intentional weight loss and all of that, I want to insert a few of these follow-up thoughts first, and then that's where the conversation will go. Because ultimately, I think in order to be able to understand the integration of tender and fierce self-compassion, all of that is happening within the context of being a spiritual being and having a spiritual relationship. And I really do think that this kind of emotional work and healing is necessarily spiritual. And so it feels like even though there's a part of me, I guess, that can be a little judgmental, that it doesn't follow the flow as my perfectionist wants it to. This is just how it's gonna go. So we're flowing with it. So having said all of that, the first thing that was coming to me a lot, and that I've been working with in my own life recently a lot, is this idea of following the call. So, like I was saying over the last few episodes, when a part of you knows that you need to end a relationship or you need to move or you need to quit a job or something like that, those big things, right? And then it's like also the smaller things of like eating a banana and having visions of, where we're going to go to dinner that night and just kind of things like that. This lifestyle of spirituality and receiving guidance and receiving direction, on one hand, like I had talked about, there are all these positives to it. And it's like, it's so great to feel like the answer has been given to you and you don't have to figure it out because, your higher self and the universe is delivering it straight to you on a silver platter. And how wonderful. And then there's also kind of the downside of that, which is like, but I don't want this to be the answer. Like, I don't want this to be the next right thing to do. And we talked about that. But the other thing, as I am out here living my life that, has come into my awareness a lot lately, is that it also forces us to confront our relationship with uncertainty. Because if you are so certain that you know best, that you know all, that you know how everything is going to go, which ultimately I believe is really coming from a place of fear, right? Because fear it can be really scary to tell the truth, which is you don't actually know and you don't have control over a lot of things. And that's where some of this is going to go, is our relationship with control. But when it comes to being open and willing to receive guidance and direction, what it means is that I am uncertain a lot of the time. I'm uncertain about what's going to happen next after that. And so what happens often for me is like, it'll feel as though I'm being guided to do something. And the immediate response that I have in my human self animal brain is like, and then what? And the universe doesn't work that way. I've learned. The universe does not give you the whole plan. The universe will give you the next right step. And then I've seen really cool visuals about this where it's like as you take the step, the ground beneath you builds itself, like surfaces. And then as you take the next step, but it's you taking the step that then invites the ground beneath it to come up. And that's the visual that I get very often is like that you're not going to see that ground until you decide to take a step. And so if you're someone, there's so much I want to say about that, but if you're someone, like me, or like I used to be very much, where it felt like the only way to feel safe was to live in the illusion that I had total control over things, over the world, over my life, over people, over my body. That was the only way to feel safe. And again, it's coming from ultimately a place of fear. That is, if I don't have total control over everything, then I don't feel safe being here. And we can talk more about that and how it has everything to do with your relationship with your body and food. But ultimately, what I want to bring to the light and bring to attention is I've had to look at when I feel uncertain or I'm forced to confront uncertainty in any way. And that could be, again, I don't know what's going to happen in my life, but also I don't know the answer. I have to be aware that that almost immediately sends me into a stress response. If the answer is I don't know, I immediately feel panicked about that. And that gets in the way very often of receiving and following the call to do something. Because if I'm going to listen, it's just ultimately having faith. I don't know what's going to happen. But so I wanted to say that because if you're someone who, even in hearing this, where it's like, what do you do when you don't know the answer to something? What do you do when you don't know what's going to happen? How do you react to the fact that you don't have total control? And if that brings up some fear, which is very valid, then it makes sense that there's something getting in the way of you connecting on the spiritual level to get this kind of guidance and direction. Like there's that resistance to it because again, if you have total control or you're living in the illusion that you have total control, then you're in creation, but you're not in co-creation. And you're not open to co-creation because you feel like you need to have total control over everything. So you see how they kind of are mutually exclusive in that way, is that in order to live this lifestyle where it feels kind of, flowy and that you're in this co-creating relationship with the universe, it requires necessarily that you understand and are willing to accept that you don't have total control and that you are not creating your life, you are co-creating your life. And I think that deserves to just be explicitly spoken about. And I will say, just to give you some examples, over the last few months, like if you've been following along, listening to kind of like the announcements about Out of the Cave as a business, things have been shifting over here. A lot of things have been shifting. The group program is ending. I'm starting to take one-on-one clients again. So the whole business model is shifting, but way more than that. A lot of things have been changing in my personal life. I mentioned a breakup. I changed my apartment. This is a huge season of transition for me personally and professionally. And the reason that I am saying that is because months ago, again, when I first started working with Cynthia, with Zach, with some of the coaches that I mentioned that have been supporting me through this, there were these moments where I felt I knew exactly what to do. And then immediately it was met with, then what's going to happen? So we'll use the example of I knew, my whole body knew and communicated to me very directly that this was the end of the group coaching program. The end of 2025 was the end of group. And that was so challenging for me and so emotional for me because I love, I love my group coaching program. And it's one of those things. Again, it's like I love San Diego and I needed to leave. I have loved the people I've been in relationships with and it needed to end. I love my group program, but I knew at this point that there was a certainty to it. There was a clarity to it that I couldn't resist. I couldn't deny. I couldn't fight. But immediately it was like, okay, well, I know that that is true. And I know that this is the kind of thing I need to listen to. But what am I going to do? This is my business. This has been the business model for the last 5 years. What's next? And then when people started asking me, you know, you're closing up the group program. What are you doing next? The truth was, I didn't know. I did not know. I had no plan. And that was so terrifying. That was so terrifying. But what was crazy about it, and continues to be, is that throughout the decision-making process, there was a knowing. There was a knowing in me that was like, you don't need to panic about this. You don't have a plan. You don't have control. You don't know where this is going. And it's going to be okay. How I knew, I don't know. What I knew, I don't know. But the reason that I'm using this example is because when I provide the visual of like you take a step and the ground beneath you surfaces because you decided that you were going to take a step, the visual that I kept getting about some of these decisions and how it felt to me was I feel like I'm going to throw myself off a cliff, which I have felt before making some of these huge decisions that I didn't understand at the time. I felt like I was throwing myself off a cliff and it felt that scary. But as I was going through it, at least this time, I had this, I guess I'll call it a bit of an awakening, where I felt like my dad specifically was involved. And I felt like my dad, like there was one day where I was really sitting with the fear. And this is why I think there's such a relationship between the emotional world and the spiritual world. Because I was sitting with my fear, my absolute terror that I'm going to finish the group program and my whole business is going to burn to the ground and then I'll, die alone. And it just went to that place. The way that the animal brain does is like everything is life or death. And it really, really felt that way, which also, by the way, I just have to say is funny in hindsight, because when I first decided that I was going to shift out of doing one-on-ones into doing a group program, the same exact thing happened where I was absolutely terrified and I had to sit with all this fear and panic of like, no one's going to want to do it. And no one's going to work with me and everything's going to burn to the ground. And so same exact thing, just now on the inverse of it. But I was sitting with my fear. And really, when I say sitting with my fear, what I mean is embodying it. Like I was writing and journaling and crying about how absolutely terrified I was. And I don't know why I'm being told to do this. And I don't know why this is the answer. And what am I going to do? And when am I going to figure it out? And like all of the fears. And I was just sitting in it, not, again, needing to fix it or change it or control it or get rid of it or feel any different, but just allowing myself to be totally panicked and terrified. And then it felt like I felt like I heard like my dad's voice, and I heard and felt him, which I do very frequently now. And I could share more stories about that. But in this specific example, he kind of showed up and was like, do you really think that you're going to throw yourself off a cliff and I'm not going to catch you? Do you really think that I'm going to let you throw yourself off a cliff and not be there? You really think that's how this is going to go? And then it became this big awakening in me that as I talk about God and the universe and spirit and source, and there's so many words we could use for it, in a lot of ways to me, that is synonymous with dad. And for a long time, and I don't know what's guiding me to say this in this moment. I hope that it helps someone. But for a long time, as I've shared, like this is not how I grew up. This is not the kind of stuff that I was comfortable with. And so for a long time, it was like all of those words were very woo woo and they didn't resonate and I didn't know how to relate to them and I didn't know what I still kind of feel like I'm navigating my relationship with the language that I like to use around this. But in that moment, it was like, oh, it's dad. It's just dad. And if how I know how much he loves me. I know how much he cares about me. I know how much he would do anything for me. I know how much he would protect me and keep me safe. And so it became this like, I can trust myself to throw myself off this cliff knowing that I'll be okay. I'm going to survive this. And that has happened a few times, but now it's very, I don't know, it just gets more, not more clear, but it becomes, I guess, more accessible every time that that's really what's happening. So, so I'm saying again all of this because that's how it's shown up for me recently. But it feels important to again explicitly call out that if you are in relationship with life, where you are still operating from a place of believing you have total control over everything, then you don't allow yourself to be uncertain or feel uncertain or experience uncertainty. And then you really can't co-create because you're too busy having total control. So if you're, I think about always, 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 if I were saying this to myself a long time ago, I now understand that this is what it means to embody faith and belief, right? It's like, I just believed, I just had faith, but even while I'm going through it, I don't think of it that way. I still don't think of it as a spiritual thing most of the time. I mean, I do, but mostly, if I were saying this to myself years ago and I wanted her to understand, and I guess that's why I'm saying it now, like if you are still not comfortable with the spiritual approach to life, you can really just think of it as feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and allowing yourself to be really uncomfortable and doing it anyway. Because while I'm going through it, there is a sense of, you know, my ancestors and God and my dad and like everyone that I have kind of on the other side is going to support me and I'm not alone in this. While there is that, it still feels like a lot of my experience is just being really, really scared and allowing myself to be really scared and then doing the thing anyway. And so if that's where you are, it's kind of like you can hold on to that as a path that is feel the fear and do it anyway. And then the more you do that, because I think this is really where it started for me a long time ago, is just doing things I was scared to do and then realizing that I would survive them. And that is how eventually it became like, oh, I think I have faith and belief because it's having the lived experience of co-creating and knowing that seeing that is actually what's happening here. And then the other thing I want to say about that, all related, is that, of course, there is a relationship between uncertainty and vulnerability. And vulnerability is risky. Vulnerability can feel scary. And so I believe that if we feel uncomfortable with vulnerability, which many of us do for very valid reasons, that we end up in relationship with life and we end up in relationship with our bodies where there's a lot of attachment. We move past, I had this, I woke up in the middle of the night and I had this like chart pop into my head. And I can't even explain what it would look like because I'm not as familiar with line graph language as I maybe used to be at some point. But what I was imagining was like there's this relationship where it's like we can have an expectation of something. And an expectation is like we think we know how it's going to go, but there's still some room for it not going that way. And then a little bit more in my opinion or my experience, a little bit more vulnerable than that is I wanting or hoping something to go a certain way. So it's more than an expectation. Now that you're bought in, there's some like emotional attachment to it. I want something to go this way or I hope something goes this way. And that's vulnerable because you're now kind of admitting that you have a direction that you want this to go in, and that requires you to have feelings involved. That's emotional. But I think that because that's vulnerable and uncertain, right? If you're saying, well, I want it to go this way, or I hope that it goes this way, that now it's vulnerable, it's uncertain. And I think a lot of us kind of breeze past that point on the chart that I'm seeing in my head, and we go straight into attachment of like, it will go this way. It has to go this way. Or even, I see this a lot, it should go this way. And all of that, I think, becomes this not intentional and not even conscious mechanism of control. Again, it's like if we can provide the animal brain with predictability and structure and say, I know what is going to happen, I know what to expect, this is what it should be, or this is what it's going to be, and this is what it needs to be, then we're creating an illusion of control because ultimately we don't have the final say of how things unfold. But I think the reason, again, I'm saying all of this is because it seems like it's all operating to very effectively help us not have to be vulnerable. And if we're not willing to be vulnerable, we are not willing to be in co-creation. I think that's what it all boils down to. If we're not willing to be vulnerable and uncertain, we're really not open to co-creating. We're not open to receiving. We're open to giving and providing and doing and making things happen, but we're not really open to receiving and partnering and collaboration. And so ultimately, if what you want is a spiritual lifestyle where you're feeling, guided, supported, connected, directed, we have to allow uncertainty, and we necessarily have to embody vulnerability. And it makes, again, a lot of sense why we kind of shy away from doing that. So once again, if this resonates with you and you're like, oh, I'm definitely that person, because I definitely used to be that person, and I know a lot of people like this who really are very controlling, and not in a like bad or negative way, but just notice your tendencies around how you engage with life. And if your perception is that you have total control and you know certainly how things will unfold, just look at that. And it's another kind of invitation to like feel the fear and do it anyway. Be vulnerable, be risky, step into that and allow it to be uncomfortable and unfamiliar, because that's the opening. And all of this also brings me back to, we had the Befriending Your Body virtual mini retreat recently, and that was awesome, and I'm so glad. Thank you guys for showing up for that. But a lot of that conversation became about the relationship between control and surrender as it relates to your body, but also look at it again through the lens of your life here in general. That is, surrender is another way of releasing control. Surrender is being vulnerable. Surrender is co-creating. And again, if we are in the relationship with life and ourselves where we like to be in total control over everything, then surrender is not an option. So the reason that I say this has everything to do with your relationship with food and your body is because it absolutely does. Because your body is one of those things that you do not have total control over. And this is where I like to remind everyone, the conditioning and the beliefs that you have around your body and potentially living in the illusion that you have total control, that's not your fault. That's what you were taught. That's not your fault. But unlearning that and learning a different, more true belief system, is your responsibility. And even deeper than that, when it comes to your body, your health, your life, your diet, all of it, it's totally your responsibility, but you only have partial control. Now, this is important. You have total responsibility and only partial control. So what that means is, in order for you to take responsibility, you necessarily have to be willing to surrender. You have to be willing to co-create. So you're not just co-creating with the universe and God, you're co-creating your experience of your body with your body. It's not all in your hands. And this has to be clarified if what you want is peace and freedom and balance and harmony and cooperation and collaboration. You want to feel like your body is your friend, right? Befriending your body is surrendering to your body. So like I said in previous episodes, if we look at the effect of things like diet culture and hustle culture that came along and taught us how to be in a relationship with ourselves, not only did it disconnect us from our knowing and our feeling and our intuition, but what it also did was basically come along and give us, I always say you're born into driving the system that is your mind, body, soul system. You're born into driving it, but no one ever gave you a driver's manual. And then diet culture, hustle culture, capitalism, the consumerist society, all of these things kind of came along and delivered us a driver's manual that was essentially teaching us how to drive a robot. Because think about it. It's like, operate as though you don't have needs, you don't have feelings, you don't have desires, your feelings don't matter. This is how you treat a robot. And the only problem with it is that we're not robots. We're humans. And so part of, like I was saying in the mini retreat event, befriending your body, is that we have to kind of throw out the old driver's manual and upgrade it with a new one. But the new one really has to include things like surrender and co-creation and understanding that you don't have total control. Because if you are still operating from that place of you're just going to white knuckle your way through life, when you're hungry, you're not going to eat. When you're tired, you're not going to rest. You're just going to kind of like sacrifice your well-being to check all the things off the to-do list and take care of everyone outside of you. If that's the way that you're operating, then there is no room for the peace and freedom that you're ultimately looking for. So as I said at the mini retreat, I kept coming back to the word humility. And ultimately, I asked this question of everyone that was there was, are you willing to be humbled? Because if you are, and again, the reason that I know this stuff is because this is where I'm coming from, is that it has been a humbling experience in my relationship with my body to learn where I don't have control. And it has been a humbling experience in relationship with my life to learn where I do not have control. So I want to read you something. I read this in the virtual mini retreat. And what it is this is not my original words. What it is I was having a conversation with ChatGPT, which is AI, a robot. I was speaking to my robot friend about what I wanted to present at this retreat. And I was talking about how, we need humility. We need to be humbled because we need to know that we are not the one controlling everything, but we're really doing this dance with our body. And again, like you can, again, I hope, see how this all is coming together and will continue to come together, that the relationship you have with the universe and spirituality is mirrored in the relationship you have with your own body and food and all of that. So this is why I want to read this to you. So this is what ChatGPT said about humility and the relationship you have with your body. Now, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. And just let this land. Just absorb this in your heart and soul. Don't think too much about intellectually remembering any of this. Humility is the quality of being grounded in reality, an accurate, not inflated or diminished sense of oneself. It's knowing your strengths without needing to boast, acknowledging your limitations without shame, and being open to learning from anyone and anything. True humility isn't self-deprecation or pretending you're small. It's recognizing you're one valuable part of a much larger whole. Okay. You are one valuable part of a much larger whole. So think about again what that means in relationship with you and your body. You are one part. You are not the entire relationship. Same is true with you and spirit. Okay. When it comes to being in a relationship with your body, humility becomes essential because your body is not a machine you command. It's a living system you're in partnership with. If ego is driving the relationship, it sounds like I should be able to control this. Why isn't my body doing what I want? If I try harder, push more, restrict more, discipline more, then it will obey. That mindset treats the body like an object, something to conquer, dominate, or perfect. But the body is not something you control. It's something you listen to. And humility in this context sounds like my body has wisdom I don't always understand yet. I may have goals, but my body has needs. I can influence my body, but I cannot override biology without consequence. Humility here isn't defeat, it's respect. It's recognizing you don't control how quickly your metabolism adjusts. You don't control how trauma shaped your nervous system. You don't control hunger cues, hormonal cycles, or the healing timeline. You don't control how your body protects you when it feels unsafe. Ego says, my body should cooperate. Humility says, my body is communicating. Ego is impatient. Humility is attuned. Ego demands results. Humility builds relationship. And the shift, the healing, happens when you stop treating your body as a problem to solve or something you should be better at controlling, and instead approach it like someone you love and are learning to understand. You lead, yes, but gently, with collaboration, not dominance. Because the truth is, your body is not trying to work against you. It has been working for you, fiercely, tirelessly, from the beginning. Humility allows you to finally listen. And when you listen, trust grows. And when trust grows, the body softens. And that's where real change becomes possible. So that's the first part. All, again, ChatGPT. Brilliant. Love it. Agreed with all of that and aligned with all of that. But again, think about what this means. Your relationship with your body and your relationship with the divine. Now, I asked ChatGPT what it thought of my question. Are you willing to be humbled? Because again, it reminds me of like Nicole Sachs will sometimes say when it comes to chronic pain, how long do you want to suffer? It reminds me of that. Are you willing to be humbled? Like that to me in a lot of ways is the first step to really coming back inside your body, but more than just the physical. This is about having a relationship with your body, an ongoing, lifelong relationship with your body that is rooted in realistic expectations, because that's the thing. We don't have total control. We're just telling the truth about it. So asking, are you willing to be humbled, invites a shift from force to relationship. It asks, these are great journal prompts, by the way, if you want some homework to do. Are you willing to let go of the fantasy that you're supposed to be in total control? Are you willing to learn from your body instead of trying to dominate it? I love this one. Are you willing to feel vulnerable instead of powerful? Are you willing to have your beliefs, assumptions, and timelines dismantled? Are you willing to admit that your body is wiser than the culture that taught you to mistrust it? Because healing requires humility. It requires allowing the body to be unpredictable, cyclical, emotional, sensitive, slow, inconsistent, and still deserving of respect. It requires acknowledging Your body's survival responses are not flaws, they're intelligence. Hunger isn't weakness, it's communication. Fatigue isn't laziness, it's data. Cravings aren't bad behavior, they're unmet needs. Humility is the doorway to cooperation. It's the moment you stop asking, how do I make my body do what I want? And begin asking, how do I work with the body I have? It's not passive. It's not resignation. It's alignment. Because until someone is willing to be humbled, they can't truly be in relationship. They're still trying to dominate, outperform, or outsmart a system that has been trying to protect them all along. Ooh. Ooh. So good. So good. So think about, again, I mean, this is, I hope, landing in regards to the relationship you have with your body, but also this is so much bigger than that and hand in hand with your experience as a spiritual being. Because what this is saying here, it requires allowing the body, humility requires allowing the body to be unpredictable, cyclical, emotional, sensitive, slow, and inconsistent, and still deserving of respect. And on some level, I think we all know that this is the nature of the body. And it's not just the physical body, but it's the emotional body. It's the spiritual soul self that lives in the body that is ultimately uncontrollable. And that's why I find very often we use certain behaviors or substances to feel a sense of control. Because if we, and I said this, a couple episodes ago, it's like if we are so intuitively connected and empathic and energetically tapped in, that can feel really uncontrollable. So of course we use things like food and other things to make it feel like we have a sense of control. But then again, if we're gripping to this illusion of total control, then we don't get to be in the dance with the universe. So it's all of this. But this slide here, this quote is talking about allowing the body to be unpredictable. But let's talk about what this means in terms of life. It requires allowing life to be unpredictable, cyclical, emotional, sensitive, slow, and inconsistent. And very often we're not willing. We're not willing to let life be unpredictable because that's vulnerable and that's risky and we don't have total control over that. And it brings up feelings. And so the same cyclical, emotional, sensitive, slow, inconsistent, we feel uncomfortable with that. And so we avoid that, or we deny that, or we suppress that, or we run from that, or, we try to make it seem like that's not what's happening. But I think when it comes to, again, the spiritual connection or lack thereof that we have, it has everything to do with the way that we are in relationship with our bodies as well. So if you're listening to this podcast, at this point, you're likely interested in having a healthier, more peaceful relationship with your body. And there's probably something speaking to you in terms of what we're talking about here spiritually. And so I hope all of this kind of comes together through the lens of uncertainty, surrender, control. Like all of this is playing out, not just around food and eating in our bodies, but, on a way bigger scale that we can pay attention to and start healing. So I hope all of that makes sense because I wanted to share all of that. And then the other thing that I want to tell you, and I go back and forth about telling you this. I go back and forth about whether or not I want to publicly claim my belief around this, but I do because I'm practicing, just clearly practicing using my voice. And I really, really do believe this. So I'm just going to say it. That is, I think some of the time we are potentially taught that if you feel, let's use the examples, go back to the big examples that I have brought up before. If you are feeling like you're struggling with your relationship, or you are struggling with your job, or you're struggling with the city that you're living in, or things like that, sometimes what does need to happen is that you need to tell the truth about it. You need to feel your feelings about it. You need to allow yourself to speak the truth and know your truth. And in doing so, it actually turns out that you don't need to do anything about it. So let's use the example of a marriage or a relationship. Maybe you're struggling and you're going back and forth and you have these concerns and doubts and issues. And because we get so scared, and I have been here many times, we get so scared of giving it a voice that we hold it in, or we deny it, or we avoid it, or we pretend it's not happening, right? Because it becomes this like, well, if I tell the truth about how I feel about my husband, for example, then it will force me to confront the fact that I need to leave this relationship. And then a brave soul will sit and tell the truth and maybe do a journal practice about it and say, this is how I feel in my relationship. This is how I feel about my husband. This is what those of you who practice journal speak, you know, you get that shit out, you put that on paper, you express and release that energy, and you acknowledge that this is your emotional experience and that is true for you. And then by way of putting it into language and giving it a voice and allowing yourself to express it, it's like, okay, like it moves through you. And then, 20 minutes later, you finish journaling and you're like, oh, I don't hate my husband. I love my husband. I was really pissed off and this is what I had to say. And I just needed to get it out of my system. And very often, that's what needs to happen. That is what needs to happen. And so, again, very often, people will do this very brave emotional excavation and arrive at a place of clarity that is, oh, I don't need to quit my job. I don't need to leave my city. I don't need to get out of this relationship. I just had really big feelings about it. I was just really mad. I was just really upset. I was just really, whatever it is, anxious. Now I realize nothing. I don't have to change anything in my life. I just had to allow the emotional energy to move through my system and be released. And this is why, like, a journal practice can be so powerful, because you can be convinced that you have to change so many things about your life. And then you give yourself time and space to essentially just feel what you're feeling. And it becomes clear, oh, that was just like an emotional outburst I was having. I don't have to behave I don't have to act on it. And that can be hugely liberating and clarifying. And I think about this sometimes as, again, language is limiting. Language is limiting because at the end of the day, your emotions are energy. And so trying to package all of that into language that resonates and, for you to articulately express yourself, that doesn't always happen. And so I think about how I use the example of we're so used to talking about inner child and inner parent, but think about like an actual child, right? If you were to tell a child that wanted to do something that they couldn't do it, or they couldn't have it, or whatever it is, go to your room, the child who's so angry and so upset might say, I hate you. I use this example a lot. A child saying, I hate you, and slamming their door. And the truth is, even though if you've ever experienced this as a parent, it's like, I would imagine, dagger in your heart. Like that hurts to hear. Of course it does. But the reason that I use this example is because when a child is saying in reaction energy, I hate you, they don't hate you. They don't mean that. They don't actually hate you. What they're doing is expressing the emotional reaction that they're having in that moment that they don't know how to use any other words for. And so between, the very long distance between the energy in the body to the package of the words, that it becomes translated as I hate you. But that's not what it is, And so very often we know that that child is not saying, I hate you because they mean it. They're saying, I hate you because they're emotional, right? And so the same is true internally very often, where you might be having this reaction toward your husband or your wife or your child or your mother or whatever it is, where it's like, I hate you. Like, I can't stand you. You know, the other day, oh God, I hope it's okay if I say this. I had a friend of mine who has kids, and she was telling me a story, and she basically was like, I dropped my kids off, and then as I was driving away, I was like giving them the finger in my head because they were such assholes to me that day. And it's like, does she love her children more than anything else in the world? 100,000,000%. Are they the most prized possessions of her lifetime? 100,000,000%. And as a mother who tells the truth and feels her feelings and embodies authenticity, does she also sometimes feel like they're little assholes that she wants to flip off? Yes. And I would imagine if you are a parent and you are willing to tell the truth, you have felt that way. So again, the reason I say all this is because you might be in a place before you feel your feelings with so much fear of feeling your feelings because, oh God, then what? Then what? Then what does that mean? Right? Do I actually hate them? And then again, you allow yourself to express it and release it. And it's like, oh God, I don't hate them. I love them. I just was so angry. So very often that's the case. You have to feel your feelings to arrive at clarity. And very often the clarity is you don't have to change anything about your life. Don't make any drastic decisions right now. You're just emotional. Okay? And that's the good news. The good news is sometimes you don't have to actually do anything. You just have to feel your feelings and release it. Now, the part that I'm like, I really sometimes hesitate to say this, but I believe this to be true. Let's rewind a minute. Like I just said, you have to feel your feelings to come to clarity. Okay. A lot of the time, the clarity is you don't have to change anything. But sometimes the clarity is you do. Sometimes the clarity is you do need to change something. And this is where I really believe that when people say, I've journaled about this over and over and over and over and over and over again, and I felt through it and I felt through it and I felt through it and I felt through it, but I don't have to change anything, right? Because I'm feeling the feelings about it. Now, I'm not saying this as like a blanket statement for everyone all the time, obviously, at all. That is not at all what this is. But I do think and believe, because I've experienced this and I know other people have experienced this, where the only way to feel a sense of peace and freedom and resolution is to actually choose to change something, is to actually choose to leave that relationship or to leave that job or to leave that city or to make that change, whatever that is, to shift the business model, whatever it is. And I think that is the thing that I don't want to lie about. I don't want to lie about. I don't want to sugarcoat this. I don't want to package this in a way that, I don't feel like I'm here to tell you what you want to hear. I feel like I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm here to tell you what you need to hear. And so that's part of what I was reflecting on this week is I feel like it really does a disservice to people in general to say you just have to feel the feelings, because you do have to feel the feelings. And again, very often you don't actually have to change things. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't know if you have to change things or not until you're willing to feel the feelings. You don't know if it's a calling to change your life or a big fat temper tantrum. You don't know until you're willing to explore it, until you're willing to give a voice to it, until you're willing to look at it, until you're willing to tell the truth about it. It's very possible that you just don't know what you're getting into. And I think, again, that's just the truth. And the only way to find out is by being willing to find out. And then the only way to know is to say at the end of all of it, all right, I gave it a voice, I felt my feelings, but now my clarity is my clarity. Either I need to do something or I don't. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. But I think it's a little bit of a hot take around this kind of work because it's not necessarily what we want to hear. But again, it's like if you're only willing, this is the thing. It's about surrender. It's surrender. It's co-creation. It's uncertainty. It's not knowing. If you're only willing to feel your feelings because you're convinced that you won't have to change anything, that's an illusion of control. That's trying to control it. That's trying to create certainty where there isn't certainty. Because the truth is, you only know by being willing to find out. You will only know by being willing to find out. And that's not from a place of, I'll step into it if I know how it's going to end. That's perpetuating a false narrative. And that's just not how it works. I have to say, I'm sitting here after saying all of that, and I'm like, again, this is one of the hardest things about a podcast, is like, I'm sitting here being like, is it okay that I just said that? Like, are you okay? You, listener, who's hearing this, like, are you okay right now? I'm curious what's happening for you. Because I don't know. Part of me, again, is like, I don't want to deter anyone. But I also don't want to lie to you. I don't want to make this sound good for the sake of it sounding good. I think what I'm here to do is tell the truth, and that's the truth. So anyway, if you need more on that and you'd like to talk more about that, please let me know. If you have follow-up questions about that, let me know. But again, I think the order of operations that is important is you start feeling some feelings. You will likely be afraid to tell the truth about those feelings, which is valid. You feel the fear, you do it anyway, you give it a voice, you say, this is how I'm feeling. And that's the part of you that might be like, I hate them, or whatever else. And then after doing that, you can see clearly and have your own clarity. That is, do I need to change something or not? Do I need to choose to do something different or not? And you're not going to know until you move through those steps to find out. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Now, I guess lastly, for this episode, I was also hearing myself talk about the embodiment of acceptance and how, it's very similar in a lot of ways to this practice of surrender, because I want to talk about, again, not just how to understand it logically and intellectually, but how to actually embody it so you feel like you can do it and live it. So the same practice is true here, and really it's true for all things that you're trying to embody and practice. And so the way that I talked about it last time with acceptance, that is, if you think about what happens or you notice what happens in your body emotionally, physiologically, when I suggest just be here exactly as you are right now. You are safe to be here as you are right now. You might notice the contraction or the tension or the clenching and freezing, tingling, whatever happens in your body. You want to notice that. That's like the stress response symptoms. And then breathe, slow down. Remember, this is uncomfortable. This is not unsafe. This is emotional energy moving through your body. It's okay. You're going to be okay. Feel your feet on the ground, activate your senses, relax the muscles in your body, like bring in the safety energy. Right? We talked about that with acceptance. The same is true here with surrender. So if you hear me saying all of this about not having total control and having to embody some moments of uncertainty and not always having the answer and needing to surrender, if me saying these things also brings up fear, contraction, tightness, resistance, first, I want you to know that it is hella valid, and that is exactly how, honestly, I still respond sometimes, and definitely would have for a very long period of my life. So it's absolutely okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And notice, you get to practice now, again, what happens in your body, and then breathe into what's happening. Breathe into your reaction and remind yourself that in this moment right now, just in this very instance, you are safe. What we're doing is we're talking about surrender. We're talking about uncertainty. You don't have to go out there and integrate all of this overnight. It's not going to happen that way. But to just start introducing this idea and letting it marinate, letting it sink in little by little. And if you can hold that and keep that alive as just an intention for yourself, while also intentionally, very mindfully, keeping your body in a state of safety. So it's not like you're thinking about releasing the control and then you clench and tighten up and you're like, okay, I'm doing it. But that's still sending the message to the brain or perpetuating the idea that surrender is dangerous and surrender is threat. And so what we want to start to practice physiologically so that you can hold on to this is that surrender is safe. And so the idea of surrender and then you very intentionally creating safety in the energy in your body will start to allow that to actually integrate. It is safe to surrender. It is safe to surrender. And just again notice what your reaction is to that. And honestly just start by noticing it, because that's the first step, is seeing that you're actually in a relationship with it wherever you are right now. And I like to think about, I talked about this at the retreat as well, that we think, because we've been taught and we've been told that we are in the driver's seat. We're in the driver's seat. And, like I said, okay, you're born into the driver's seat. Yes, you have to drive your own mind, body, soul system. But the truth is, in a lot of ways, at least in my experience recently, especially, it's become clear to me that I'm really in the passenger seat. I'm really in the passenger seat of life. Living a human life as a spiritual being, I'm told where to go. Or maybe I could say I'm the driver, but like there's a GPS in the car. I don't know where I'm going, and it's only giving me one direction at a time. And that's kind of frustrating because I want to know where it ends and I want to know what comes next and what's the stop after it. Which lane do I have to be in? It's not going to tell me that. And so it's like we just allowing ourselves, I think, to visualize what this looks like, what this feels like, to kind of get a sense. And then while you are, it could even be in a visualization of you being the passenger in the car rather than the driver, if that's where you thought you were hanging out all this time, to notice again how that affects your body language, your physiology, and just practice. You could even practice visualizing yourself in the passenger seat and taking really slow, deep breaths. And just again, what you're doing is teaching your brain that this idea of not having total control over everything all the time is safe, or at the very least is not necessarily life-threatening all of the time. That's a start. And that will have a lot to do with you feeling safe in your body and safe around food. Because as is probably clear to you by now, a lot of the issues that you have with your body and food are not about your body and food. So when I talk about getting to the root of the issue, this is very really what I'm talking about. The spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context, surviving on food, feeling safe to surrender. Now, now we're talking. And the last thing that I will wrap this up with now is this is why I feel so passionate about yoga as a practice, and why I think it came up in an episode. I don't even know where I say things anymore, but I know that I was talking about it recently, definitely in my group, about how yoga is everything and everything is yoga and life is yoga and yoga is life. And the reason that I was saying that is because this practice of getting uncomfortable and then mindfully breathing is really what yoga does and supports us with. So as I was saying again in like one of these previous episodes, it is connecting the mind to body through breath to movement. And as I was again listening to all of this stuff about embodying the energy of acceptance and embodying the energy of surrender, if you want practice, like if you're like, wow, this is my growth edge, this is not at all what I'm familiar with. Like I am a total, control freak type of person. I don't even like that language, but like, if you're in a relationship with life where like not having total control or certainty really, really freaks you out, I genuinely think one of the best things you can do is go to a good yoga class with a solid yoga instructor. Not just a yoga class with any instructor, a yoga instructor who really knows what they're doing and understands like the sacred practice of connecting mind to body through breath to movement. If you have access to that, that's your training ground. That's your playground for this, where you get to try this on. Because a lot of yoga is, you're putting yourself into uncomfortable positions. You're putting yourself into challenging poses and postures. You're doing hard things that are going to very often activate your stress response. And then immediately you're guided to your breath, relax, release. And it's wildly rewiring. And especially for anyone that isn't really familiar with yoga or doesn't have a practice or has never done it, you don't have to, I guess part of what I want to say here is like, you don't have to do it for the physical benefit of it. Like, you don't do it for the balance or the flexibility or any of the other things. Like, you'll get all of that, and that's wonderful. But if this is your growth edge in life, I want to invite you to a yoga class and experiment with yoga, because that is where a lot of this is kind of like the rubber hits the road. I think we get a lot of really great practice doing that. And that's why it is so healing, why it is so helpful around body image and eating disorders, why it is just so helpful. I mean, when it comes to depression, anxiety, I've heard so many stories of people whose lives have been completely shifted and changed by this practice, because this is fundamentally on so many levels what it's doing is saying you're uncomfortable, you're not unsafe, but it's not, again, just saying that. It's guiding you through having the embodied experience of that, so your mind body system gets like the blueprint for it. And so I just could not say all of that about embodiment and the energy and safety and all of it without saying, P.S., go to yoga if this is something you want to practice. Okay, so I think for today, that's going to be the end of this, because the next, where this is going, and I know I keep saying that, but really what's coming next is I'm going to talk about how all of this starts to integrate and relate specifically to intentional weight loss. Because now we've established clearly you're a spiritual being having a physical experience. You have an animal brain in a social context. You survive on food. But now we've laid such a foundation of being in relationship with the universe this way, living a spiritual life, the relationship with your body and food, fierce self-compassion, tender self-compassion, radical acceptance. Like, we have laid the groundwork to now talk about what has been going on in regards to intentional weight loss. Because to me, that's where all of this is going, is if we can clarify what is fierce self-compassion, what is tender self-compassion, what does self-care look like, and how do you have these energies, masculine, feminine, balancing out, that's really, again, where all this is going. So next, that's what I'm going to, well, you know what? I don't know, because that's the intention, but I could have another hour of follow-up thoughts. So thank you for being on this journey with me. But that is ultimately, again, like where it's definitely going to go, because so many of my notes are about that. So we're getting there. All right. I love you. I love this. Thank you. I mean, talk about co-creation. Here we are doing it. Here we all are doing it. And I also think about, like, I'm going to give a shout out to one of my clients who said this to me this week. She said she was listening to, and I know you'll hear this, she was listening to my first episodes of this podcast, which I haven't listened to in I don't know how long.
And she was saying, like, my voice was like so quiet and I was like timid and like shy and stuff. And I was telling her, I was like, the first episode of this podcast I recorded, I didn't even release because I was so terrified. And it took me about another like 6 or 8 months to sit down and do it again. And then I did it again in a closet. And I was so scared. I was so scared. I was so scared in the very beginning, especially of the solo episodes. Oh my gosh. And I was saying to my group, we were just talking about it, that I would have to block out the rest of the day. If I were recording a podcast, I couldn't have anything else on my calendar because it completely took me out because of how activated my nervous system was. Like I was in such fight or flight about it. And it's just really cute to look back on that and be where I am right now, which is like I'm sitting down and I'm like, wow, this is so fun. I have so much stuff to say and I feel safe doing it. I feel safe using my voice. So it's taken a few years. We've gotten here little by little, but I really do say wholeheartedly, like, thank you for being a part of this experience because it's been such a, I mean, meaningful and rewarding project for me, but it's also been obviously so much related to my own personal development and confidence and strength. And I really, that's not been lost on me, but especially when it's reflected back to me, which it was recently this week. So thank you. Thank you. Just saying thank you again. So, all right. I hope you enjoy, as always. Let me know your thoughts and be in touch. Have the best week of your whole life, and I will see you again next week. Mwah.